Hi guys, I just wanted to say a quick word, and we'll follow this up with a more in-depth post or video because it's pretty big and I want to get into it and talk about it. But I want to start with something really quick right now that I did mention yesterday, and I'm going to say it again. Not just because something is popular is it therefore true. And not just because something is the predominant theory or the way of things, how they've always been, does that mean that it's inherently true, like it has the vibration of truth. This is a whole different subject. The difference between simply something appearing to be true and the vibration of truth, which you can feel in your body, are two different things, and we'll get into that at a later date. But I just wanted to really quickly mention again that not just because something is popular or not just because it's in the mainstream is that thing true. And I want to follow this up by saying, for example, not just because a certain theory is thrown around and is found in all scientific books isn't necessarily true. And this is the key crux point here, because it means that there is a war on perception. There's a lot of things that we don't know the full meanings of or what they're actually connected to. And it becomes important to look at what perspective is being taken, what's the angle of these things, and to find the true history of events, the true history of how things operate. Because it's going to actually help us tremendously at this time to see the connections between things. They're not what they seem. And I'll do a little quick introduction to something before I go more into depth in it later. Did you know that in the 1930s, I think it was that year anyway, the germ theory by Louis Pasteur overtook a different theory, a theory that actually made a whole lot more sense, but it just wasn't as politically correct or might have dismantled everybody's work, and so it was put to the side. That other theory was called the terrain theory. We're going to begin with the germ theory really briefly here. The germ theory is what we see around us as of now, all of today, and everything that we've had before. The germ theory speaks of things that live outside of us, that are constantly battling us, that come from the outside in, and once they enter into us, they wreak havoc upon our bodies, they make us ill, and we're in an arms race and a fight with these beings, and therefore we require pharmaceutical drugs, therefore we require vaccinations to fight against these things. The germ theory was put forwards by Louis Pasteur and a German doctor called Heinrich Robert Koch. And this particular theory is what we find predominant right now. The fact that we have to wash our hands and guard against all of these different things. And this is going to become important in future derivatives of this information because we're going to go back into it and try to understand it. The second part that I want to talk about is the terrain theory, which was wiped out of existence by this germ theory. The terrain theory says, it's by Antoine Béchamp, and he said, a French doctor said, the environment inside the body is everything. The microbe is nothing. This is very, very important because it means that the environment within the body determines whether it's a diseased or a healthy state. And it therefore tells you what kinds of things can live in that environment. Let's look at nature itself and understand from nature's perspective. When there is any type of excess in nature or a death, there are organisms that come in and they feed upon that. That is the natural way. Nature is in balance. It basically works sustainably and cleans things up. You find the same thing within the body. When there is a diseased state, there is an excess of certain microorganisms that feed off of the disease. They are not the cause of the disease, they are feeding off of the disease. This is mind-blowing because it changes the entire perspective of history and what it is that we have learned, what it is that we do currently, seemingly, to keep disease away. Disease cannot be kept away from the outside. Rather, it is an internal thing that's governed by four things. The first one, the acid-base balance of the body, whether the state is alkaline or acidic, the pH. Second, the electromagnetic or magnetic fields within the body, whether they're positive or negative. Third, the state of toxicity within the body, the state of poisoning. And fourth, the state of nutrition, whether the being is receiving the adequate antioxidants and nutrients, which actually create this healthy environment which nothing else can live in. Those four things are really important to look at this point because any disease state will include an imbalance of those things. And I want to bring forth the question right now for us to look at. When Louis Pasteur had in front of him a petri dish that had microorganisms growing in it, is not the more important question to ask in this point? Not were there microorganisms in there? There were indeed. But let's ask, what perspective did he look at that dish from? That's the important question here. The perspective he looked at the dish from was one that these things had come into that body and destroyed it. He was not looking at it from the perspective of perhaps those beings were already imbalanced. Perhaps those people were already sick, in which case, in the state of sickness, you find these microorganisms multiplying. And this is not my work. You can find this looking into the terrain theory. You can find this in the work of many, many scientists, a lot of whom have not been able to have their work come into the mainstream. For example, Tullio Simoncini, an Italian doctor that came up with the cure for cancer through using baking soda. And let me tell you why. He basically said that cancer was a fungus. Okay? And this is really important to note because it meant that within this disease state of body that was so acidic that microorganisms could thrive and a candida-like organism, a fungus which already lives in our body, could predominate, he found that in terminal stage cancers and building up to this problem, you had blooms of this fungus multiplying all around the body and choking the organism. And basically, any treatment that would deal with those funguses would eradicate the cancer. Mind blown. There you go. There is a state of organism that is linked to the types of things that might live inside of it and what those point to. There's so many aspects of this that I do want to get into in a deeper way, but I will leave this live now with this concept. And this is mind-blowing, truly mind-blowing. Due to the predominance of the germ theory, we actually do not think about various discrepancies that exist within the medical and scientific worlds because we see things from a particular lens and we don't call out when something doesn't make any sense. I'm going to preface this by saying that when I was a young girl, in school, I loved biology. There was always one thing, a niggling doubt on my mind that did not seem true. And whenever something like that happens, I know there's more to the story and I will go down that path. And that was the identity of viruses. They did not fit into anything within the classification tables. They were not animal, they were not fungus, they were not microbe. Some argued they were not alive, some argued they were. They couldn't fit into those classifications and it made no sense to me. But I didn't know why. And I didn't know until much, much later that that is because the understanding of this thing is so different than what it actually is. And here is where the perspectual drop comes in. There are several scientists, along with the terrain theory, that have speculated that viruses are bits of code, genetic code, and we're already aware of this, that are released from poisoned cells. Okay? Keep that in mind for a second. So, originally, we are not able to find a classification for viruses because they're not alive. They are bits of DNA or RNA. Oftentimes, as many papers have actually speculated, they seem to have coincided in evolution alongside human genome. I will tell you why. They are the human genome. They actually are released from our very own cells. You find that cells that have been in a toxic stress or duress environment are poisoned in any type of way, namely by those four measures being out of balance. The acid-base balance, the electromagnetic electric fields, the state of toxicity. There are so many different types of poisonous hazards in our world at this moment in time, including pesticides and heavy metals. And the fourth state of nutrition. You find that most diseases, most problems coexist with those things out of balance. So primarily with this viral code that gets released from cells that have been poisoned, that is mind-blowing and altering to everything that we know about how things operate. Namely, viruses cannot exist on their own. They cannot exist without a host. They don't live on things because they're not alive. So we're not out here infecting each other with viruses. If you go down this pathway, you begin to see the connections. This fact that cells that are poisoned release this stuff, in which case you can test for it in your blood and find that there are neurotoxins, find that there are bits of code that we label one thing or another, tells us that this smoke is coming from a fire further upstream. It's coming from a fire that we have to go find the source of to understand what exactly is the agenda and what are all the factors that are correlating together to make this a thing. And the final thing that I'm going to say about this is that looking at this case studies of what is going on and just looking at the situation from an objective standpoint and observing it, here's what I'm noticing. There is so much misinformation, bad reporting, and bad science that's being thrown all around. This actually, to me, is the missing puzzle piece about how all of these things interlock together. The fact that we are not thinking at all about all of the underlying conditions or the underlying states of illness that these people already had. We're not thinking about the rollouts of 5G in those places that map out with the virus incidents. We need to be looking at the effects of the 5G, and we need to be looking at these places that have them. This is an important research point. Also, not to mention the fact that most of these tests actually create false positives. You can right now go into journals and look at the fact that a lot of these tests actually have an 80% false positive rate. Many others of them are inaccurate. What are we actually even testing for? So if you have the mass media pushing people to believe that they are sick, not only is that a placebo effect, not only are these people already sick from underlying conditions, because let's face it, has humanity up until this point had a perfect acid-base balance, a perfect electromagnetic field within their body, a perfect state of nutrition, and a perfect distance from toxins? No. The answer is no. Okay, our understanding of how health operates has not been perfect up until now, and the situation has also been skewed. And that's another subject that we'll get into later down the line. However, this fact is known. Already the state of illness was not that clear. Second, people are being pushed by the mass media into doing these tests, a lot of which are giving false positives. And also, statistically, the more people that go forwards for something, you're going to find more numbers. Therefore, this whole hype of, oh, here has all these numbers, and here has all these numbers, and here has all these deaths. Yes, it's happening. Yes, it's there. Yes, those things are happening. However, you cannot at all throw out of the window the concept that there are different perspectives in our reality. That you could be looking at something from this angle and it appears one way, and you could look at it from there and it appears another way. Or the fact that things coexist and we're not looking at all of the different factors. We cannot neglect that at all. I really do see it at this moment as terrible reporting and terrible science, because to conflate all of these conditions and all of these aspects, whether out of ignorance or agenda, with one specific cause, which at this moment in time, having had all my research collide within my brain today, is actually a big question mark. Do viruses even exist as the state that they are shared? There's a big red flag here. And as I've known from experiences that I've had within my life, where there's a red flag, there's something up. So I'd like everybody to be thinking together, what have you seen? What have you felt? What do you think? Let's go on into these research aspects, because I will end now with this concept. Just because something is popular or the predominant theory does not make it true. And the last thing to say here, which I'll touch up again on another time, there was a specific time and space when information that was of a certain order was completely masked and taken down and was replaced with different theories and different agendas. Let that sink in for a second. The fact that a lot of our reality is scripted by certain agents that have had agendas with the information that they share. That in itself should make us not feel so sure that we know everything about the world that we live in, and should at least open our eyes a little bit to do a little bit more research to connect these dots. Stay well, and I wish you all the best. Talk later.